Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The dinner invitation arrived on a Tuesday. My mother sent it through my aunt, which meant she already knew I wouldn't respond to her directly. A handwritten note which meant she wanted it to feel significant. Sunday dinner. The whole family. It's been too long, Naomi. Please come. I read it twice. Set it on my kitchen counter. Made coffee. I should explain something about my mother because the invitation and what came after it cannot be understood without understanding her first. Margaret Elaine Holt, she goes by Margaret, never Maggie, she corrects people firmly on this, is a woman who built her entire identity around being right. Not just confident. Not just opinionated. Constitutionally, architecturally, profoundly committed to the idea that she sees the world more clearly than everyone around her. She was a high school vice principal for 21 years. She ran the household like a committee she chaired. She distributed praise and criticism with the precision of someone keeping score, and she kept score about everything. Growing up, her favorite phrase was, "I'm only saying this because I love you." What followed that phrase was never love. It was assessment. It was the steady, practiced work of telling you exactly how and where you were falling short. My older brother Marcus got a version of this that eventually hardened him into someone who agreed with everything she said. My father, Raymond, quiet golf on weekends Raymond, learned 30 years ago that disagreement had a cost he wasn't willing to pay. He nodded along. He still does. I was the one who pushed back. Not loudly. Not with drama. I simply kept living differently than she prescribed, and she interpreted that as a personal challenge. When I left my hometown of Columbus, Ohio for Washington, D.C. at 24 with a computer science degree and a federal contractor job that paid adequately but not impressively, my mother told her book club I'd run away. When I didn't call every Sunday, I was distant. When I declined to come home for the 4th of July 3 years running because of work deadlines I couldn't explain, because I held a security clearance and the work was classified, I was lying about being busy. That was her word. Lying. She used it casually at first, then deliberately, then loudly at family gatherings I occasionally attended, when someone asked what I was up to these days. Naomi says she's busy. Who knows if that's true? I want to be honest about something. It hurt. Not the sharp, dramatic hurt of a single blow, but the slow, accumulating kind. The kind that makes you drive home from holidays in silence, not crying, just empty. My therapist, Dr. Weiss, calls it chronic invalidation. I just called it Sunday dinners. The note sat on my counter for 2 days. Then I called my best friend Priya, who has known me since our first federal contracting job in 2014, who was present the night I stayed in the office until 2 a.m. drafting the proposal that would eventually become the foundation of everything I'd built. Priya, who is now my chief operating officer and who still makes me laugh harder than anyone on the planet. She sent a handwritten note, I told her. "Oh, that's bad," Priya said immediately. "Should I go?" Silence. Then, "Naomi, you know I support every decision you make. But I want you to think carefully about walking into that house without knowing what she's planning." I thought about it for another day. Then I RSVP'd yes. Here is what my mother didn't know on that Tuesday when she sent the note, and what she would still not know on the Sunday when I arrived. Meridian Federal Solutions. The company I founded in 2018 out of a spare bedroom in my Capitol Hill apartment with Priya and one underpaid genius named Derek Chin, who is now my chief technology officer, had, as of our most recent independent valuation, a verified worth of $120 million. We held 3 active contracts with federal agencies I cannot fully name in casual conversation. One involved cybersecurity infrastructure. One involved data systems for a program that had been in the news, though not in connection with us. The third was the one that had changed everything. A 7-year engagement that represented more recurring government revenue than most firms our size ever see. I had 17 full-time employees when I got my mother's note. I had a downtown DC office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a conference room named after a jazz musician, Coltrane, because Derek insisted. I had a security clearance at a level I don't mention at dinner parties. I had been named to a federal advisory committee on technology infrastructure the previous spring. I had quietly, methodically, over the course of 8 years, built something real. My mother believed I worked in government IT. He pictured a cubicle. Help desk tickets. Someone's bored daughter sitting at a monitor making something up about her life. I had never corrected her. This is the part people find hardest to understand, so I'll explain it carefully. I didn't hide my success out of cruelty. I didn't hide it to set a trap. I hid it because I had watched over many years what my mother did with information she was given. She redistributed it. She used it as currency. She shaped it into whatever narrative served her current argument. If she'd known about Meridian in 2019, when we landed our first major contract, she wouldn't have been proud. She would have called relatives to announce it as though she'd always believed in me, and then she would have started asking questions I didn't want asked. About finances. About ownership structure. About what I could do for Marcus, who had been struggling with a business of his own. Marcus. I should talk about Marcus. My brother is 3 years older than me, broad-shouldered, charming in the way that works on people who don't know him well. He ran a mid-size logistics company called Holt Distribution that our parents had partially capitalized years ago with money I was told at the time didn't exist. Family money. Money that had somehow been available for his venture and unavailable for my graduate school applications. I never raised this at the table. I filed it and moved on. What I didn't know, what I was not yet aware of on the Tuesday I received my mother's note, was that Holt Distribution had been struggling for 2 years. Badly. And that Marcus, in his efforts to address that struggle, had made decisions that were going to matter very much before this story was finished. The Sunday I drove back to Columbus, I took my own car instead of flying. 4 hours. I needed the silence. I had a book on tape, a biography of Katherine Johnson which felt appropriate, and a very good thermos of coffee and the particular internal quiet that I've learned to access before difficult things. My business partner and closest advisor besides Priya is a man named Gerald Washington, former federal prosecutor, now our general counsel. I had called Gerald on Friday. I'm going to a family dinner Sunday, I told him. He said. My mother has been telling people I lie about my career. She may have done something. I don't know what. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, do you want me to make a call? Not yet, I said. Let me see what she's done first. I arrived at my parents' house at 5:47 p.m. 13 minutes early, which I did deliberately. I wanted to read the room before the performance began. The performance had already begun. There were 11 people in that living room. My parents. My brother Marcus and his wife Diane. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Pete. 3 cousins I rarely saw. My grandmother, who is 81 and sharper than all of them and sat in her usual chair near the window looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And a man I didn't recognize, sitting slightly apart from the family in the corner chair near the bookshelf, with a leather binder on his knee and the posture of someone waiting to deliver a presentation. My mother saw me register him. She smiled. He'll read the report at dinner, she told everyone loudly the moment I set down my bag. In front of the whole family. She swept her arm toward the room as though conducting. No more excuses, Naomi. No more stories. We finally hired someone to find the truth. Dad nodded from the couch. About time. Marcus was standing near the fireplace with a drink in his hand. He didn't look at me directly. I noticed that. Mom, I said. Come. What is this? A private investigator, she said with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been saving this sentence for weeks. 32 years experience. Former law enforcement. We paid for a full background investigation. Employment records. Financial records. Your company if there really is one. Everything. She paused for effect. Because this family is tired of being lied to. My Aunt Carol nodded vigorously. 2 of my cousins exchanged a look that was somewhere between entertained and uncomfortable. My grandmother looked out the window. I set my bag down fully. I stood straight. I said nothing. The man in the corner, 50s, gray at his temples, an economy of movement that suggested former military or federal service, stood when my mother gestured to him. This is Mr. Garrett, my mother announced. He can begin whenever we sit down. We sat down. The dining table was set for Sunday dinner. My mother had made pot roast, which she does for important occasions. There was good china. There were candles. She had staged this. She had thought about this. She had planned exactly how it would feel to watch her daughter's fabricated life get dismantled over pot roast and good china. Mr. Garrett placed his binder on the table. He opened it without theatrics. I was engaged 6 weeks ago to conduct a full background and professional investigation, he said. He had a measured voice. The voice of someone who has delivered difficult news many times and learned not to rush it. The subject of the investigation is Ms. Naomi Elaine Holt. He glanced at me briefly. Not apologetically. Professionally. Standard investigative protocol at my firm requires that when a third-party complaint triggers an investigation, both the subject and the commissioning party are documented. This protects my clients from liability and ensures the integrity of findings. My mother's smile held steady. She didn't hear that part yet. Or she heard it and didn't process what it meant. I'll begin with the primary subject, Mr. Garrett said. He turned the first page of his binder. Naomi Elaine Holt. Age 38. Current residence, Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. Education. B.S. Computer Science, Ohio State, 2009. M.S. Information Systems Security, Georgetown, 2013, completed while employed. He read without looking up. Employment history. Federal contractor positions from 2009 to 2018, clean record, multiple performance commendations documented. Another page turn. 2018. Founded Meridian Federal Solutions LLC. In Washington, D.C. currently serves as CEO and majority shareholder. The room was still. Aunt Carol had stopped chewing. Company valuation as of most recent independent audit. $120 million. He said it the way you'd read a weather report. 3 active federal contracts, 2 of which carry security classification designations I'm not at liberty to detail in an open setting. He looked up for just a moment. The third is a matter of public record and was reported in federal procurement data last fiscal year. He turned another page. Ms. Holt holds a top-level federal security clearance, current and active. She sits on 1 federal advisory committee. She has received no civil judgments, carries no personal debt beyond a standard mortgage, and has no criminal record of any kind. He closed the first section. The room was the kind of silence that happens when everyone is doing math they didn't expect to be doing. My mother's smile had not disappeared yet. It had changed shape. It was working harder now. She looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at his drink. That's the primary subject, Mr. Garrett said. He reached for the second section of his binder. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, standard protocol requires documentation of the commissioning party. This protects the integrity of the investigation. He paused. Not for drama. Just to be sure everyone had followed the first part before he continued. During the course of my investigation into Ms. Holt's professional background, I encountered financial records that overlapped with entities connected to this household. Professional standards required me to document what I found. He opened the second section. I watched my brother's hand tighten around his glass. Holt Distribution LLC. Mr. Garrett read. Registered in Ohio. Primary shareholder Marcus Raymond Holt. He turned a page. In the course of reviewing financial entities associated with this family, which became relevant when assessing Ms. Holt's family background as part of her professional profile, I identified a pattern of financial transactions inconsistent with the company's reported revenue. What does that mean? My mother said. Her voice had changed registers. Mr. Garrett looked at her calmly. It means that over a period of approximately 26 months, funds were transferred from a client account held by Holt Distribution into a personal account not registered with the company. The total documented amount is $340,000. The silence this time was different. It had weight to it. That is not, Marcus started. I have the transaction records, Mr. Garrett said simply. Dated, itemized, cross-referenced against the company's reported filings. He set a tab section of the binder on the table. I am not an agent of law enforcement. I document. I don't adjudicate. He looked at my mother. But I am required by the terms of my professional license to report evidence of financial crimes to the appropriate federal authorities when the amounts and methods suggest wire fraud. He paused one beat. I filed that report on Thursday. My mother's smile was completely gone now. Thursday, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. He turned to Marcus. Marcus was not looking at anyone. And then my grandmother from her chair by the window said quietly, Margaret, what did you do? My mother stood up. I don't think she knew she was standing. Her body just moved. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not the familiar ice of her disapproval, but something rawer. Something close to panic wearing the mask of fury. "You knew," she said. "You knew something like this would happen. You let this." Mom. Kept my voice level. "I walked in here the same as you did. I didn't know what he'd found. This is your fault." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Everything about this is your fault, Naomi. Marcus wouldn't have needed to." She stopped herself. The room heard what she stopped herself from saying. Diane, Marcus's wife, stood up slowly from her chair. She looked at Marcus with the specific stillness of a woman assembling information in real time. "Needed to what, Margaret?" she said. Marcus said nothing. That was the moment I think Diane understood that her marriage had just changed. My father had not moved from his seat. He was looking at the table in front of him, at the good china, at the pot roast cooling in its dish. He looked like a man watching a building he'd lived in for 40 years begin to come down. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Gerald. Text message, there. I looked toward the front of the house. Through the living room window I could see 2 cars parked on the street that had not been there when I arrived. Dark sedans. Government plates. The knock at the front door came 30 seconds later. My father answered it because he was closest and because he is a man who defaults to the ordinary motions of his life even when everything has stopped being ordinary. He opened the door and 2 federal agents in plain clothes introduced themselves and asked if Marcus Raymond Holt was present. Marcus stood up. He was still holding his drink. He set it down carefully on the mantel, the small, controlled gesture of a man trying to maintain some version of dignity. He straightened his jacket. He looked at my mother. She looked back at him. And something passed between them that I will not pretend I fully understood. 38 years of dynamic. 38 years of golden son and favorite child, and I invested in you, and this was not supposed to happen. Whatever she had enabled, whatever she had covered for, whatever she had quietly made room for, it was visible in that look, and it was finished. The agents were professional and unhurried. They asked Marcus to come with them for questioning. They explained his rights. They suggested he contact legal counsel. Marcus walked out of the house in his good jacket without saying goodbye to anyone. The room after he left was not dramatic. That surprised me. I'd expected my mother to cry or rage, or perform some version of herself that I would have to absorb. Instead she sat back down at her dinner table and looked at the pot roast and didn't speak. My Aunt Carol took her husband's arm and they made their excuses quietly and left within 10 minutes, taking their son. My other cousins followed shortly after. The exodus was polite and swift, the way people leave a party when the fire alarm goes off. Not running but not lingering. Diane sat at the table for a long time after Marcus left. She's a quiet woman, Diane, careful and private, and I had never known her well. I didn't know what she knew about Marcus's business. I still don't. She looked at me once across the table, not with accusation, more like someone searching for the answer to a question she wasn't sure how to ask. I didn't have anything to offer her. I nodded. She nodded back. She left without her coat. Mr. Garrett packed his binder with the efficiency of someone who has done this before and will do it again. He paused before he left and looked at me. "Miss Holt," he said. "For what it's worth, I've been doing this 22 years. Your professional record is one of the cleaner ones I've documented." "Thank you," I said. He left. My grandmother had not moved from her chair by the window. My father was at the kitchen sink, washing the dishes that hadn't been used yet, running the water, doing something with his hands. This is how my father processes things. He makes himself useful, he finds a task, he moves through grief by moving. My mother and I were alone at the dining table. I want to be honest about what happened next because the honest version is less satisfying than the version where I deliver a speech that lands perfectly and she finally, fully understands every mistake she made. "That didn't happen," she said. "I just wanted to know the truth about your life." I looked at her. "You wanted to win an argument, Mom. You've been having the argument with me for 15 years. You hired someone to help you win it." She didn't deny it. She looked at the table. "I didn't know about Marcus," she said finally. "What he was doing. I didn't know." I believed her. This is the complicated part. I believed her and it didn't fix anything and it didn't break me either. My mother is not a monster. She is a woman who needed to be right more than she needed to see me clearly, and that need had cost she hadn't finished paying yet. "The money you used to hire him," I said. For the investigation. Was that yours? A long pause. It was from the joint account, she said. Mine and your father's. How much? 11,000. My father had stopped running the water. I could hear him standing still in the kitchen. I'm going to go say goodbye to Grandma, I said. I stood up. I walked to the chair by the window. My grandmother reached up and took my hand without a word. She held it for a moment. Her hands are small now and very warm, and she has the grip of a woman who has outlasted a great many things and intends to outlast more. You did good, baby, she said quietly. I didn't do anything, Grandma. It happened without me. That's usually how the best things happen, she said. I squeezed her hand and let go. I drove back to DC that night. 4 hours. I didn't play the audiobook. I didn't play music. I drove in the dark with the windows up and the heater on, and I thought about everything that was now in motion, the things that could not be unset. Gerald called at 9:30. Federal agents picked up Marcus Holt for questioning at approximately 7:15 p.m., he said. The wire fraud documentation is solid. He'll likely be looking at federal charges within 60 days depending on how cooperative he is. Pause. How are you? I'm fine, I said. Naomi. I'm processing, I said. I'm driving and I'm processing. That's allowed. Gerald. Did you know? Before I called you Friday, did you know about Marcus? A careful pause. I knew there was something worth knowing. I didn't have specifics. When you told me about the dinner, I made some calls, confirmed that Garrett had already filed his report. The agents were already moving. So the timing was real, he said. I didn't orchestrate it. I just confirmed what was already in motion. I thought about that for a mile or two. My mother hired that PI, I said. She pulled the thread herself. She did. She thought it would end with me being exposed. Yes. And instead it ended with her son being walked out of her house by federal agents. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Sometimes people are undone by the very moves they thought would protect them. 3 weeks after that dinner, Marcus's attorney reached a preliminary agreement with federal prosecutors. The wire fraud charges were significant. Civil recovery proceedings were initiated by the defrauded client company, a mid-size regional shipping contractor who had trusted Marcus's operation for 4 years. The amount subject to civil recovery exceeded the $340,000 documented in Mr. Garrett's report. Additional accounting revealed the total was closer to $410,000. Holt Distribution filed for bankruptcy protection in November. Diane filed for legal separation in October. I heard this through my aunt. I did not hear it from Marcus, who has not called me. I do not expect him to. My mother called me 6 weeks after the dinner. It was a Sunday, which I noticed. She called at 2 p.m., which is when she has always expected calls, not made them. I want to understand, she said without preamble. Your company. What you do. I want to understand it. I was in my office. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon and I had been reviewing contract renewal terms, and the city was gray outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, and Priya had texted earlier to say she was bringing coffee in 20 minutes. I held the phone for a moment. Hey, I said. Okay, you'll explain it? Okay, Mom. I talked for 40 minutes. I told her about Meridian, the founding, the first contract, the 18-hour days in 2019 when Priya and Derek and I were running on determination and very little else. The morning the second contract came through and I cried in a parking garage because I hadn't let myself cry before that, the advisory committee, the clearance process, all of it. I told her things I hadn't told her in 8 years. She listened. She asked 2 questions. She didn't try to redirect or correct or reframe it as something other than what it was. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'm sorry I called you a liar. Not, I'm sorry if you felt that way. Not, I'm sorry things turned out like this. She said, I'm sorry I called you a liar. It was the most precise apology she had ever given me. I want to be honest about what it did and did not do. It did not repair 15 years. It did not return the Thanksgiving dinners where I drove home empty. It did not give back the energy I spent explaining myself to people who had been told I couldn't be trusted. It did not fix the part of me that still, on certain quiet evenings, feels the particular loneliness of being dismissed by your own mother. But it was something. It was more than I had expected, which I realize says something about what I had come to expect. The Monday after that Sunday phone call, I arrived at the Meridian office at 7:45 a.m. Derek was already there, which he always is with his terrible coffee from the machine in the break room that we keep meaning to replace. Priya arrived at 8:10 with good coffee from the place on the corner and the contract renewal terms printed and annotated in her perfect handwriting. We had a full team meeting at 9. 17 people around the conference table in the room named after Coltrane. New contract review. Staffing projections for the coming year. A conversation about expansion into a service area we'd been evaluating for 8 months. At one point Derek said something that made everyone laugh and I looked around that table, at these 17 people who had bet their professional lives on something I'd built from a spare bedroom, and I felt something I don't have a perfect word for. Not triumph. Triumph is too clean, too finished. This was something more like, this is real and you built it and it has weight. Later when the meeting ended and people filtered out, Priya stayed behind. She sat across from me in the quiet conference room with her annotated pages and her good coffee and she looked at me the way she looks at me when she knows something is still being processed. "How are you?" she said. She apologized, I said. "My mother." "Sunday." Priya nodded slowly. "What did that feel like?" I thought about it honestly. Like getting a letter that should have arrived years ago. You're glad it finally came. But you already learned to live without it. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's about right." Outside the window Washington was going about its November. People on the sidewalk below, coats and coffee. The ordinary Tuesday motion of a city that doesn't stop for any individual story. My reflection was faint in the glass. A woman at a conference table in a building she owned a piece of, in a life she had built from the ground up while someone she loved very much kept insisting it wasn't real. It was real. It had always been real. That was the thing about the truth. It had never needed her permission to exist.